audio. You're on mute, I think.
No, I'm not. I'm okay on my end.
Are
Hold
you
on a
hearing
second.
him, Shadowhawk?
He was. We had a conversation.
No audio.
Yeah. I can hear.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
wait,
on
I
your end.
may be.
Can you hear me?
Okay. All right. Now I'm hearing you. May
How
have
is it?
been delayed through YouTube. I might have been on YouTube there instead of StreamYard. How are you, Gary?
Good. Do I call you Rex? Or is that a nickname?
Okay. I'm not.
You're not hearing me?
Shadow, are you?
Can you hear
Shadow,
me?
you can hear me,
Can you
correct?
hear me, Rex?
I'm not hearing him through
Yeah,
StreamYard. Are you hearing me? I'm
I
sorry.
can
We
hear
went
you,
early.
and I can hear Gary. I don't know. It must be something on your end, right?
Yeah, it's on his end. If you can hear me.
Okay. I
Yeah,
can hear you
I can hear
through.
Gary just
I can
fine.
hear you through YouTube. Okay. Let me check my audio. I should have done this before we started.
Right, yeah. The internet, so much fun.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me now? No?
I can hear you fine still, Gary.
Oh boy. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rex.
I can't hear. I can't. For some reason, I'm not picking you up except on YouTube.
Huh.
Shadow is hearing me. So yeah, it's a problem on your end.
Yeah. I don't think Rex is hearing me.
Yeah, and that's going to be on a delay. Okay, let me
You know what,
let me
Rex? Try
pop out
popping
a
out
moment.
and come back.
Yeah, let me pop
Oh, you
out,
can't hear
and I'll
me.
be right back.
Okay, good. Yeah, my camera turns off
Yeah, I'm
every once
guessing
in a
so.
while, and I haven't figured out why. It'll
Yeah,
just shut
StreamYard will
down.
do that too. Every now and again, it does that to me too, where my microphone just starts getting weird after a while, and then I have to either switch over to a plug-in mic or put in earplugs so that it'll start picking up all kinds of weird things.
Okay, how's this? I think I can hear you now.
You sound
You
better.
still sound good.
I've never had that happen before. Gary, master artist here, A Brush with Destiny, got a book up on. It's launched, right?
Yes, it's on Fund My Comic.
Yeah. Now, Gary,
Oh,
how long
awesome.
you been? How long you been in the field here? I first saw you a couple weeks ago on a show with Aaron Lepresti.
I've been working in comics for a long time. I started in the 80s. So you can do the math. I've been doing it a long time. Yeah, I started with DC Comics, so I like my first professional work is with DC. And I worked for
Okay.
DC and Marvel for several years and actually several decades. And then I worked for other companies like, Image and Dark Horse and Disney and, Archie and, I got around.
I'm just curious because I'm going to do a book on him. Did you happen to know or have heard of Jack Adler from DC
Yes.
Comics?
Yes.
Okay.
Although he was not there when I was there.
Right. Yeah. He retired, I guess, in the early 80s, around 83, or I'm not sure on that, but there for decades.
When I first got there, actually my first trip to DC to show my portfolio, Joe Orlando was the president.
Okay.
And then I went back. I grew up in California, went back to California and got my stuff together and then moved to New York. And between that time, he retired. And I think Paul Levitz took over at that point.
Okay. And before Joe, it was Carmen Infantino, correct?
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Joseph Dredd. Yeah, I had keyed up, but since I kicked myself, I had keyed up one of your pieces that you had done and posted on for Aaron Lopresti's Kit Carson and
Carter.
or Carter, I'm sorry. And I just found out a couple months ago that actually this piece here is kind of an homage to an old Frank Frazetta, 50s Frank Frazetta cover, isn't it?
Well, it's more than kind of. I mean, it's a
Uh-huh.
direct swipe.
Well, I
I
know that
recreated.
I've got some production artwork here from DC Comics, so I'm glad you're a DC guy. Here's Weird Worlds from the early 70s. Let's see what year. I don't know if it says, but that I did not realize that this was actually from a Frazetta piece.
Yeah, Frazetta was kind of the father of comics. I mean, pretty much everybody either has swiped from him directly or indirectly and not known it. I mean, his shadow, his influence is huge over the comic book industry.
Well, I noticed you had done a one from Wally Wood as well.
Yes, I do recreations as commissions, and I've done probably over 100 recreations. I will be including a bunch of those in my art book campaign. So we'll see the Wally Wood pieces on my campaign page on Fund My Comic.
What are some of your favorite artists that are out there in the sequential art field?
Well, the list is huge. Yeah, the list is huge. I'll just hit the top ones. Obviously, Frazetta and Wood. A little bit of Al Williamson. And then the more modern Brian Boland, Michael Golden, Jerry Ordway. Who else? Buscema, Romita, Kirby. You know, all the greats.
You probably go back and like artists like Alex Raymond and maybe
absolutely
Burnt Hogarth or Joe.
Oh
Kubert.
Yeah, I met Hogarth at a convention and bought some art from him. Alex Raymond was the artist that Steve Rude wanted me to emulate when I inked him on Nexus, and so I studied Raymond quite a bit.
Yeah, you and Rude have worked on a book about inking, haven't you, together?
Yes. Well, he contributed to it. It's he added some artwork and different artists inked on it, but I authored it and put it together.
Hey, Mike Walters in the chat.
How did you feel about Bernie Wrightson, Gary? Were you a fan?
How did I miss Wrightson? Of course, yeah.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, Wrightson was amazing. He set a new level.
Gary, what are some of your favorite inkers that we might know? Like,
well, we can go back to like early Marvel days. Probably number one for me was Joe Sennett.
Okay.
Joe Sennett elevated everyone that he inked. And that was my goal as an inker is to do that, not just to cover up the pencils with black lines, but to make it look better.
Yeah.
And that was my goal. I don't know if I achieved it or not, but Joe Sennett was he set the benchmark for control and cursive lines and to the point to where when inkers and pencilers were talking about styles and lines, they would say, give me like Sennett slickness or a Sennett type of line.
Polish.
Yeah, exactly. And so his name became like Scotch tape. I mean, everybody knew what you meant when you said Sennett.
I think it was amazing the story that this was back in the days when they kind of mailed it in, faxed it in, or I mean, you had to send off the artwork in packets, right?
FedEx.
Right. And I think it was 11 years uh, before Jack Kirby and Joe Sennett actually met.
Right. Didn't they like meet at a convention or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, he'd been inking Jack stuff for over a decade
Decades.
and never
Yeah,
met the man.
right.
Yeah. Anyone
Yeah,
else? You like that real polished style?
I tend to like the controlled polish style.
Yeah.
My inking book, I was fortunate to work with a bunch of guys, all top guys: Dave Stevens, Mark
Oh, yeah.
Schultz, Mark Schultz. Who
He's
else?
got that
Kevin
cheesecake
Nolan.
polish. Dave Stevens did,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Dave
you know,
Stevens, you ever get a chance to see his original comic pages up close? They're just,
mhm.
they're perfect.
What'd you
I
think
mean,
about Tom Palmer as an inker?
Oh, Palmer was amazing.
Yeah.
Palmer, there weren't too many guys that could ink um, Gene Colan or Neil Adams
Yeah.
the way they should be inked. Tom Palmer
Yeah.
was one of those that could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's some, till Bob Layton came out and did Hercules, which was his first writing limited series in the early 80s, his first writing gig. But I primarily looked at him as an inker, but after he did that, it's like, oh, I got to recast this guy as an
Right,
artist,
exactly.
His inking style is pretty close to Joe Rubenstein, I think.
Yeah,
in
they
my mind.
Leighton
Maybe,
apprenticed
I'm sure
under
there's a difference.
Leighton apprenticed under Dick Giordano, as did Terry Austin, and as did I.
Huh?
Bob Layton, actually, it's funny you mentioned the Hercules miniseries. Bob Layton hired me to ink some of his backgrounds on that miniseries. So some of my work is in that miniseries. I don't remember if I was credited or not. But I remember going into the Marvel office, and Bob was going to a comic book convention that weekend, and the pages were due, and they weren't finished. So while Bob was at the convention, I was at Marvel inking backgrounds.
Well, he's out having fun. He does
Exactly.
a lot of conventions. I noticed because he tweets all about them all the time. He's doing a lot of commissions now himself. Have you? I guess you've done the convention circuit over and over and over again.
Oh yeah, I cut way back on it.
Yeah.
Traveling and dragging all my stuff across the country is, it's kind of difficult. And a lot of conventions nowadays are more media festivals. They're not so much comic book conventions.
Right. It's not creator comic centric anymore, is it?
Like they have celebrities and all kinds of stuff, and that cuts into the interest of comics.
Yeah, so really, if I knew that, that's when I did the convention thing, was back in the 80s, and got to meet some greats like Romita Sr. and others, and Mike Barron and Steve Rude. And if I knew how good we had it, I would have kept going to conventions.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I when I first started going to conventions, you could just walk up to Kirby and Steranko and and Vern Hogarth and just walk up to them and talk to them.
Yeah,
It wasn't to the San Diego Comic-Con for probably 15 years in a row, and sat in Artist Alley, and they kind of systematically ruined Artist Alley to the point where it used to be you get an 8-foot table and 2 chairs. Now it's a 4-foot table and 1 chair. So you can't bring anyone. You can't bring enough stuff to sell. I mean, and plus you're pushed all the way in the back. So not that many people have the energy to get back to you after seeing everything else that's there.
Yeah, unless you're a big major draw like Stan Lee, right? I mean, he had lines going on for hours and hours.
Oh well, they pay. Yeah. They give him an appearance fee. They don't give me an appearance fee.
Right. Yeah. I've heard Chuck Rosansky talk about, from the owner of Mile High Comics, of course. It's like he's even cut back a little here and there on certain conventions or only certain ones he does, because the comic, he's had to kind of streamline the business, I guess, because he's taking a lot of product to sell and, drawers and drawers of comics. And I'm just amazed that anybody, puts that much effort into one weekend.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably hit the comic shop, comic book collector vendors that bring lots of inventory. Less and less of them are going to big conventions because it's, like I said, it's not about the comics anymore.
Yeah, that's sad.
No,
I really
seems
did
to
not
be
realize.
about
Is
a
that
lot
your
of
experience?
cosplay and
Shadow,
like
is that
that,
your experience?
Yeah. I didn't get to attend any of the really big shows, unfortunately. Back in the day, I did get to go to Chicago. Like, I think it was the second year, maybe second or third year that they did Chicago. And it was great, but it was just out of my price range at the time. I think I was in my 20s.
Yeah, he's up around the Chicago area. That's where I went, was Chicago Comic-Con at the time in the mid 80s. It was the largest in the world. I don't know when San Diego Comic-Con started, but San Diego Comic-Con, I'm sure, dwarfed that very quickly.
They started out pretty small, and
Mhm.
they grew really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they've got
Now,
a good comic book base out there, don't they? And a large population to fuel it.
Well, if you're at the convention and you're standing at one end, you cannot see the other end. That's how big the convention center is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah,
oh yeah, crazy. It looks massive. Compared to today, those mid 80s conventions look like one large room, maybe one section, a little nook off of it, but just it's nothing compared to today's. It's nothing. And I thought it was massively big. We had smaller conventions, and sometimes I went to a couple in I'm near Memphis, about an hour away, and they had a couple conventions, their first couple at the Peabody Hotel, with the famous ducks and everything. And they had a couple of different levels in the they had like a cosplay and gaming type, and then they had the comics all on one level. But compared to today, these conventions look very small in retrospect, but they were more personable. You could
and that exactly. Well, plus it was kind of like hardcore collectors. The people that attend comic cons now, they're more families and people that are there because they like the characters that they've seen in film and on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't used to be like that. People that came to comics conventions is that they were there for the artists, they were there to collect, they were there to hook up with their collecting buddies and talk comics. It's not like that anymore.
No, now it's like who's on Netflix, got the Netflix deal, or the new movie is celebrity, and paparazzi follow around, and the news agencies. It's really sad to see, because there were so many greats, right? Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. We pass the torch, as Steve Rude was saying, to the next generation.
Exactly. And I think it's a dying hobby. Most of the people our age are the hardcore collectors. The kids don't go to comic shops anymore and buy back issues. A lot of retailers don't even stock back issues.
Yeah, that's crazy. They would rather have a backlog of Funko Pops.
Right.
Yeah.
But
God, that's the bane of my existence.
I think the direct market killed comics, Gary. I mean, when we were kids, remember the spinner rack?
Oh, absolutely.
Or at least going to the grocery store and being able to find some on the racks.
That's where I got my comics at my neighborhood 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven? Okay.
I used to have like four little 2 pharmacies and a couple of convenience stores when I was growing up, and I would put in like 5 miles every Wednesday on my bike, going to all four of them, check and see
Uh,
what was on the rack.
Yeah, I had got my allowance and rode my bike and had enough money in my allowance to buy one Slurpee and two comic books.
Now, what
Yeah,
really got you
exactly.
into what really got you into comics? What kind of did you go straight out of college or what? Design school? What?
No, well, I kind of went out of college.
Hmm.
I decided that I wanted to pursue comics as a career shortly after high school, and that was before there were specialty schools for comic art. So that was pre Kubert School,
Yeah,
and so I
yeah.
kind of had to
Oh,
teach myself. So I would go to local conventions. I grew up in San Jose, California, and so I would go
Oh,
to Bay Area
okay.
conventions and bring my portfolio and show it to local artists and get critiques from them and go home and work on it and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. To the point to where I met Terry Austin at a convention. He lived in New York and he came
Oh,
to the West Coast to a show in either
he's
San
one of
Jose or
my
San Francisco. I don't remember.
favorite anchors.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
yeah, mine
he
too.
gave me a great critique, and then told me that if I sent him some of my samples when he got back to New York, that he would critique them. And then we did that through the mail. This was before internet,
Right.
and
Mhm.
he finally sponsored me to come out to New York, and he took me around to the different companies, to Marvel and DC, and to Neil Adams Continuity and Dick Giordano's studio. It was in Connecticut at the time. And they all said, well, if you move to New York, and you could probably get work as a background inker. And so that's what I did. I went home and took care of thing I needed to move. And then when I moved, which was a couple months after that trip, Dick Giordano was hired by DC as an editor.
That's
So
it.
I had that connection.
He
DC.
he was prior to DC. He was over at Charlton, wasn't
Oh,
he?
he was everywhere.
Yeah.
But he had his own studio, and a bunch of artists worked for him. He also worked at Continuity with Neil Adams, and
Mhm.
he worked for everybody.
Uh, what do you think about an
That's pretty
anchor that?
amazing.
Go ahead,
Go
Shadow.
ahead. No, I was just going to mention to Gary that when he had mentioned Terry a few minutes ago, I was going to bring it up and say, yeah, Terry's one of my favorite inkers. And then I was going to ask you, did you have a chance to work with him? And obviously you did. So,
Well, not work with him, but I had many
but,
conversations with him, and he. Well, I guess if you count the inking book, the art of comic book inking, he contributed to that, and so I had conversations with him about that.
I hear he's a
right.
big Popeye collector. He likes
Oh yeah,
everything Popeye.
absolutely, yeah. He would put Popeye in the background of some of his
Hmm.
comics.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have noticed it.
I kind of look at Popeye as the first superhero.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, you're right. Remember, I was reading a collection of E.C. Segar's Popeye strips, and I didn't know that much about Popeye except for the cartoons. I hadn't seen the newspaper
Right,
strips.
right.
And the strip that I was reading, Popeye was in the hospital for some reason, and the doctor was looking at him and couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And then he finally said, "Oh, I figured it out. I know what's wrong with you. Your forearms are swollen from your wrists to your elbows." And I almost wet my pants laughing. I was like, okay, this Seaguard guy is hilarious.
That's amazing.
Oh,
But
you got me.
him poking fun at his own character design.
Yeah, you got me cracking up, Gary. That's wonderful. Oh, yeah. Yeah, things have really changed, haven't they? I just feel like the direct market just killed comics. No longer can you go into a pharmacy or grocery store or gift store and just find a new universe,
Right.
a new way of looking at life, through fiction.
Well, how many of us as kids go on the family vacation and parents pack you in the car and you go, station wagon or whatever, you go for a drive, and they always stop off at some mom and pop store and you load up on, monster magazines and comic books or whatever on
Yeah.
a trip, and those days are
Oh, yeah.
gone.
I know you can't have a chance encounter that might change your life anymore.
Right.
You know,
Exactly. That's
it's all
exactly what it is.
it's
It's
all on the internet, and
Yeah.
there's just so much garbage out there. I don't see how young people filter through it all and become productive, stable citizens. I guess through trial and error, like the rest of us.
Well, that's the hope.
That's the hope, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Help me,
Well, yeah,
Obi-Wan.
and Gary,
You're my
that now
only
that you
hope.
brought it up about the conventions, I mean, I find the same thing, especially in my area with a lot of the comic book stores. We've got stores that have hardly any back issues whatsoever. They're not carrying a big array or selection of new stuff. They're
Right.
concentrating on board games and RPGs and freaking Funko Pops, which I can't stand. Um, I can't even get supplies locally anymore. I've got to order them online.
Yeah. I think that, the local comic shops, if you call them that, they have to carry the products for the people that are interested in their area instead of
Right, right.
introducing, hey, look at this. Isn't this cool? They get people to order stuff ahead of time, and that's all they order instead of
Mhm.
having product for people to choose from. And that's what I'm used to. Going to the comic shop, looking at the rack and seeing all these titles and artists that I didn't know. And then you buy a comic and you like it, and then you want the back issues. So you go back
Yeah.
to the comic shop and get the back issues, and comic shops don't do that anymore.
No,
I
no,
do.
it's a whole different world, though.
What is your take on the manga thing?
Well, it's comic art.
Yeah.
It like anything else. There's good manga and there's bad manga. Some of the good manga is brilliant. I mean, it's just mind-blowingly amazing because the Japanese artists are looking at it from a different perspective, and they bring different things to it that Western artists don't know about. They have a different system. They have different techniques. So there's American comic artists can learn a lot from Japanese comic artists, and vice versa.
What do you think
But there's a
about?
lot of bad manga out there too, and there's bad American comics too. So it's all a matter of taste.
What about like someone like Klaus Janson that's kind of not in your wheelhouse of being called a polished inker?
Well, he was more polished earlier in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of my all-time favorite inking jobs. I can't remember the title. You might be able to help me out here. He was inking Gil Kane. It might have been a Defenders annual or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I
he
remember
did some of those. Yeah.
the Hulk and Submariner in the story, but he was doing stuff in that I had never seen before. Stuff with Zipatone and color holds and things like that. It like blew my mind. But as he progressed in his career, his inking style got looser and looser.
Did you? I guess you met Keith Giffen.
Oh, I inked Keith, and we used to hang out. Like when I go into New York, into the DC office, sometimes he would be there, and we went out to lunch a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. You jogged my memory about his recent passing, because some of my favorite and early stuff that I saw of his was Defenders. He had a brilliant run on.
Oh yeah, that's when he was. Isn't that when he was kind of doing a Kirby style?
Yeah, kind of a Kirby style. Yeah, absolutely.
But then he took a break from comics, and then when he started working in comics again at DC, that's about the time that I started in comics as well, and so I would run into him at the DC office.
Shelby Robertson, he worked for Image Comics. He says, catching up on the stream, I was born and raised in Livermore, pretty close to Gary's old stomping grounds.
Oh yeah, Livermore, San Jose, not too far away.
Yeah, there was a lot going on, especially in the underground scene. I know Mike Barron was really into the underground. You ever get into Zap Comics or Furry
No,
Freak
it was a
Brothers or any of
little.
that?
No, the some of the art was cool, but the underground stuff was a little salty for my taste.
Yeah, yeah.
So I, and I would have been, skinned alive if I would have brought something like that home.
Maybe even to till today, right? It's like, what's this
Oh
trash?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mother wouldn't approve.
No, no.
Yeah. Uh, now I was primarily a Marvel guy, but I read both,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I followed artists like George Perez from like Marvel to DC. No problem, you know. His stuff just drew me in and made me. I had gotten some comics previous, but it had not made me a collector. And in fact, I don't think in my mind, Gary, that I thought, even though it said next week or next month, it never registered with me. These are things like a soap opera. They continue on and on.
yeah,
I kind of,
I grew up buying and reading Marvel, and we kind of had a little conflict in our neighborhood. There was the Marvel group and
mhm.
the DC group, and we used to argue of what comics were better. But back then, I'm talking about like mid to late '60s. That was the golden age of comics for Marvel. That was the John Buscema era, the Kirby era, the
Mhm.
John Romita era. That the stable of artists they had was has never been matched and probably never will
Well,
be.
you mentioned him earlier, and I think, some of the greatest Bronze Age 70s covers done were done by Gil
Oh, Gil
Kane.
Kane, yeah, Gil Kane, yeah. I mean, the artists they had were just amazing, and plus the stories were more compelling. The
Mhm.
stuff at that time at DC, as an example, they didn't know what to do with Superman, and
More
so
compelling compared to today's stuff?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
Why?
okay,
Why?
this is my opinion, so it's the disclaimer.
Mhm. Okay.
Today, the
That's what I
stories
wanna
are
hear.
more, yeah, today's the stories are more about social commentary
Yeah.
and I'll just leave it at that. Social
Yeah, the what
commentary.
the woke stuff that's in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
'60s in the '60s and '70s, they were just basic morality tales.
Yeah.
You'd have a main character, the hero, and they had to make the right choices to prevail.
Uh,
And those kinds of stories resonate with people more than anything else.
well,
And
you had Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams pushing the envelope in Green Lantern with the drug issues. Of course,
that
that'd
was
been
that was DC's attempt to booster sales. DC back then and even now, they have these meetings and they sit around and try to figure out
mhm.
how to raise sales, and they come up with these gimmicks. And you can look at over the years, killing off characters and doing all this crazy stuff has nothing to do with good stories. It's all about sales, and that was basically the gimmick. That when Stan Lee wrote the Spider-Man stories of
Mhm.
tension with college campuses on
Mhm.
different social issues, DC said, "Okay, how can we top that?"
Yeah.
And so they did the drug issues.
Why is it Shelby's got a question, but before I ask his question, why is it that DC and Marvel are so incestuous? One does it, and then the other does it in their own
Well, it's
way.
because they're in competition.
Yeah.
And I guess that's it's same with any kind of business, is that you're Coca-Cola and Pepsi are
Pepsi.
at each other's throats. It's the same kind
Yeah.
of thing, but this is like a creative field, and so they're
Is it
trying to.
like the movies? It just seems like they're doing remakes. They're originally bankrupt. Is that's what happened in comics? Because they've been
Oh, absolutely.
emulating each other for decades since the
I'll
80s.
tell you a short story. I was working on a project with another pencil artist, and we came up with an idea for Wolverine. We wanted to make Wolverine zapped by gamma rays and turn into like a Hulk Wolverine, and we called it Wolverine.
Yeah.
And this would just last, you know,
I love it.
his Hulk powers just last like one issue.
Right.
And then when at the end of the issue he pees and pees green, and all his power leaves him. And the last line of the story is, remember kids, don't eat green snow. So we pitched this idea to a Marvel editor, and he loved it. He just flipped for it, and he wanted to do it. He says, "Okay, I'll have to, you know, run it by, you know, the Mucky Mucks."
It wasn't Archie Goodwin, was it?
No, this was later than that. This was in around the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Okay.
like
Oh wow.
so we don't hear back from him. Like a month goes by and we don't hear back from him. And it's like this, I mean, he was really excited. Why isn't he getting back to us? And in comics, no news is always bad news. It's never good news. It's always bad news. So we finally, you know, we kept calling him and emailing him, and he wouldn't answer. And so we finally answered, and he says, "Look, I'm just going to have to be honest with you guys. I love the story. Yeah, you know, I think it's a great story, but our system here at Marvel is that when we get a new project, we show it to our accountants, not creative director, not, you know, a writer, not a creative person. They show it to the accountants, and the accountants look at the records and see if Marvel has published anything similar to it. And if they have, they see what the sales were. And if the sales were good, the project gets okayed. If it's something that's never been done before, they reject it because they have no basis for what the sales will be." And remember when Marvel's slogan was the House of Ideas?
Right.
Yeah.
So their system absolutely destroyed any kind of originality or creativity. It was all about the sales.
Yeah.
And when you have accountants running a creative industry, what's going to happen? It's going to, you know, implode, and that's what's happened at Marvel and DC.
Yeah, it's lightning in a
hard to
bottle.
believe that anybody would think that a Wolverine book with a Hulk semi crossover involved wouldn't stop. You know,
the premise was the Wolverine times 10.
Well, you know, I don't.
Wolverine is the whole powers. Who wouldn't want to see that?
I don't know if I've collected
I'd
it,
go
but
out to see it today.
I've seen it. Marvel's used it. I mean, they have had like Hulk X or something. They have crossed the Hulk with claws, you know, with Wolverine. So they have used that ideal. I mean, at least, you know, 6 or 7 years ago is the first time I saw it.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that when you have to run projects by someone
The bean
who doesn't
counters.
know anything about comics,
Right.
and they're the ones that give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. I mean,
Weapon
that's
H.
just insane.
Okay. Yeah. Weapon H. Thank
Weapon
you.
H. Yeah, I've not heard of that. So that where did they get that idea?
Maybe you, Gary. I mean, a lot of the ideas
I'm saying, but
that they created, they first did in those what if, you know, imaginary stories.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They later became characters or things that they ran with. Shelby asked, who was Gary's favorite artist he worked with and least favorite? Without torching any bridges, he says.
Yeah, the least favorite. Probably my favorite is David Williams. Williams just finished a project called Bass Reeves,
Right.
It's
Yeah.
based on a true character that was the inspiration for Lone Ranger.
Lone Ranger. Yeah.
Yeah, and David worked in animation. He worked at DC and has done a ton of covers for Marvel and for IDW. Great artist. When I ink his pencils, I don't have to try to match his style. I just ink it the way I want to ink it because that's the way he wants to see it. And that's the best situation for me. As an example, we were talking about Steve Rude. I have to ink Steve the way Steve wants me to ink him. So I have to put on a different hat. With David, I never had to do that. It was the way I wanted to ink him.
Do you
Least
think more
favorite-
of your own?
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead and finish your.
No, ask the question because I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Least favorite. I'd say least favorite is someone that I couldn't really categorize and couldn't wrap my head around. Shoot. Let me get back to you on that.
It's okay. Yeah. Without burning any bridges. Yeah. Least favorite. Maybe most difficult is another way to put it.
That's really cool too, Gary, because we were talking about my name earlier and stuff. Dave goes by Brohawk on YouTube, so we're kind of brothers in the feathers.
Okay. I think artists that can't maintain the schedule and I'm stuck with trying to save the project.
Yeah.
That's happened to me several times.
You have to put more work in.
Right. Where the penciler's work diminishes and he's actually doing less and less per page. And the editors expect me to fill those gaps and they didn't compensate me for doing that.
Now I guess you've done some recreations maybe of Kurt Swan. He has a very clean style.
Yes, I've done several Kurt Swans. Yeah, Kurt Swan. I never really noticed his stuff until I saw a Kurt Swan Superman that was inked by Anderson. What was his first name?
Gary?
Oh
no.
No.
Brent Anderson. Brent Anderson?
No. Wow. I'm the chat. Help me out here.
Yeah, somebody help us out here. It's not coming to my brain.
Wow. I can't remember his name. I'm having a Biden moment here.
That's quite all right.
Shelby in the chat says
Murphy.
Says Gary, I did
Murphy Anderson.
Murphy Anderson, yeah. When Murphy Anderson, I thought that was magic.
Spectre, Hawkman, many things, right? Atomic Knights. Yeah, Murphy Anderson. That's another one of those that had a really clean style.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I like that little. Now, what do you use? Do you use a lot of brush, quill? How do you work? How do you ink?
I'm mostly brush. If I show something on my screen, can you pull it up?
I can. Hopefully, I won't have the difficulty I did with my audio starting out. I must have bumped my cord when that happens. Must have went sideways on me, but Rocky City, good finish.
Sometimes that piece. StreamYard loading up, right? Sweet. Ooh. That.
I believe that piece is behind you, isn't it? Or one like it?
Yes. Yep. So this is almost I would say 95% brush.
Okay.
I ink mostly with brush. If I blow it up, you can see the cross hatching. That's all brush.
Wow. Wow.
And then the background is splatter. I use a toothbrush for that.
Right. Holy
you're doing your processing
with a brush, Gary? Wow.
Pardon?
less control with
I'm
the
sorry.
brush, isn't there, Gary? I mean, it's very. I mean, the more pressure the fatter the line, right? I mean,
Right, exactly.
it's,
And for me, I've always used a brush that
mhm.
I actually get more control with a brush than I do with a pen. Let's see. Let's
That's
pull up another
isn't
piece.
that abnormal?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I prefer a brush
I don't know
myself.
anybody that did their cross hatching with a brush. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
So a couple of these long lines are ruled, but everything else is brush. Like all this line work, cross hatching, that's all brush.
Okay, but you're actually using a straight edge, right? I mean, so that
On
you can.
these like these long lines, I'm using a straight edge,
Okay,
but
so
everything else is freehand with a brush.
okay, so how do you get such steadiness and when with your and regularity with your line if you're freehanding it? It's amazing. I mean, I know on the helmet you're going to have some curvature to it, but that's amazing
Well,
work, Gary.
it's all about like you mentioned pressure.
Hmm.
Um, with a brush, you can regulate the ink flow, and you can't do that with a pen, the modern pens. So you can dilute the ink and make it like thicker or lighter. So when I do like the cross hatching lines or little tiny hatch lines, I use kind of a dark gray ink instead of black. And so
Hmm.
you don't have to have, because the ink is thinner, you don't have to have as much of it in the brush, and it actually lasts longer. And you can kind of get into a rhythm. So each line you put down is similar to the previous one.
In your book, will it all be like gray tone, black, white, or will are there
Yeah,
some, or
the
do you
entire art
use?
book is all
Okay.
black and white. Yeah,
Do you
it's
ever work with
Oh
colored
yeah.
inks, Gary?
uh, sometimes, not that often. I prefer black and white.
Mhm. Hex
Let's
Allen
see.
says, "Hell, Gary Martin taught me everything I know about brush
Ah,
inking.
Hell,
that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
He must have your book."
That's it. Sounds like it. Yeah. So here's another piece that
Mhm.
this is mostly brush. Let me blow it up some.
Are you a big Star Wars fan?
I'm a fan. I don't know how big. I
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
characters. Some of the stories kind of go off rails sometimes, but I like
Well,
the
I was
characters.
tw- I'm Dan Lawless age. I'm Billy Tucci age. I'll be
Okay.
58 here November 2nd. That's Steve Ditko's birthday as well.
Okay.
Uh, so I'm a little bit younger than you, I think, but still I was like 12 years old when Star Wars came out. So I wasn't a
No,
young kid.
I was in my early 20s when Star Wars came
Okay.
out.
Okay. Yeah. So
okay.
you and I are not that enamored with it as some young people are.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So here's a piece I was trying to do that old fashioned Franklin Booth technique, and Wrightson did a lot of that, like with his
uh,
Frankenstein pieces,
Oh
where you
yeah.
use parallel lines to create a gray. And because this character Ahsoka has like these white shapes on her face, I wanted
right.
to do the flesh tone with a gray, and so I decided to do horizontal lines. This might have been with a brush. This might have been the most difficult piece I've ever inked.
I
Once I
can
If
started
imagine. I
somebody,
mean, look
putting
at
these lines down,
holy.
I was like, what was I thinking? But it was too late, I had already started.
but besides your own book, Gary, on inking, and I assume you just have the one book. I just learned about it, and I do plan to get a copy of it at some point. If someone wanted to ink like you, who should they study besides you?
Well, if they wanted to ink like me, then they would study me.
Yeah,
But I'm an amalgam. Um,
yeah.
There's so many great line techniques and artists that have mastered it. You have to be versatile as an inker to be able to ink different pencilers. And you have to have different inking styles to do that. So the more versatile you are, the more work you will get.
And
if you
that's
just
not
have one inking
necessarily
style,
different. That's not necessarily using, I mean, sometimes it would be using different tools, but it's just sort of a pitcher, I guess, against a batter, right?
exactly.
Kind of where you kind of change, you know, if you would pitch a certain way if someone batted left-handed than right, and same way with different styles of inking, right?
Exactly. And
Different artists.
that's a good way of putting it. That, as an example, we talked about Gene Colan and Joe Sennett. Joe Sennett on Gene Colan, in my opinion, was not a good match. Tom Palmer on Gene Colan was a good match. And Tom Palmer was a little more subtle. His inks were looser, not quite as bold, and that suited someone like Gene Colan. Obviously, Joe Sennett on Jack Kirby was, you know, a match made in heaven. Tom Palmer inking Kirby, I don't think would have worked as well.
Yeah. Vince Coletta is one that I often I'm up and down on.
Well, Coletta, he was very talented, but he decided early in his career that he was going to be the go-to guy. He was very fast, and so he saved editors many times with his speed. And so he got a lot of jobs just because he could turn over a whole book and, you know, in a few days. And that's why we'd see jobs that, like, why is Coletta inking this, you know, particular guys? Because the guy turned the pages in late and they needed Coletta to meet the deadline.
Trusty Sidekick says, which brushes do you prefer?
I used to be a Winsor Newton Series 7 guy, but their quality control kind of waned over the years. Now I don't buy them at all. I switched over to Raphael's. They're all Red Sable, and I think I
was
used
going to ask you, do you use any synthetics, or is it Red Sable?
No, it's all Red Sable. The Red Sable brushes give you that needle point on the tip, and that allows you to do that real crisp, you know, like Joe Sennett feathering. We'll use his name again. And that was like the standard for a long time. But again, like, it's something that you still have to practice with, but without a you know, the best Red Sable you can get your hands on, you're giving yourself a handicap. So I would recommend, if you want to ink with a brush or learn how to ink with a brush, go to like Dick Blick website and get a Winsor Newton or Raphael Red Sable.
Shelby says you could draw your own American dollars.
Well,
masterful. A lot of lines.
Yeah. No comment on that one, Gary. No comment.
I don't think that would be cost effective, the amount of time I would spend on one.
Right. And getting that holographic strip in there.
Oh,
now,
exactly.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Now, if I look at your old comic book collection, what got you started? What titles? What artists like Sal Buscema or somebody jumped out at you?
Well, when my 7-Eleven Slurpee days, it was Kirby and Steranko. Kirby was doing Thor, Captain America, and Fantastic Four, the trifecta. And Steranko, of course, was doing Nick Fury.
Right. Yeah.
Then I kind of got out of collecting comics when I went into high school. And when I moved out of my house, my parents' house, I was cleaning out my room, and I had somehow given my comics away, or my mother threw them out or whatever. I can't remember. and I was cleaning out the top shelf bookcase, and I found an old Jim Steranko, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. comic book. And that rekindled all those, emotions of why I love comics in the first place. And then I found a comic shop in downtown San Jose, and I'd never been to a comic shop before. So I can't remember how I found out. Somebody told me about it. And then went down there, and they had all the back issues. Yes, correct, Trusty. 8408 is the one that I use. I've heard that the 8404s are kind of sketchy, but that has not been my issue. I stick with the 08s. Some people prefer the 04s. Anyway, back to my story. So I started buying back issues and getting back into comics and rebuying some of the stuff. And I had missed Kirby's New Gods at DC, so I bought the entire series. And one weekend read New Gods, Mr. Miracle, Forever People, and I'm forgetting one.
Oh, Commanding, maybe?
No, there was 4, right? New Gods.
Right. New
Mr.
Gods
Miracle.
and Mr. Miracle.
Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal. That was the 4th title of the 4th, So I bought all those issues and just piled them up on the floor and laid on my couch and read back to back each one in chronological order. And that scarred me for life, or the opposite of that, changed my life. And I wanted to pursue comics as a career after that. And that's when I started drawing my own comic stories and, that kind of thing.
A lot of people don't know that Darkseid was an influence on Darth Vader, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
Kirby went over and changed DC as much as he probably changed Marvel, huh?
And that was a blessing and a curse, because DC did not want Kirby to have that much influence and power.
Yeah.
Kirby's vision was not to draw all those books himself. His vision was to be an editor and have a bunch of artists doing that for him. And DC didn't want him to have that much power. And that's
which he did with Joe Simon back in the 40s, right?
Right. It wasn't about, they didn't think he had, they didn't think he didn't have the ability. That wasn't the issue. They just didn't want him having that much power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's comics have really changed, haven't they? But at the same time, are they still on the old 30s model? Like, I mean, you have a page rate. Has it gotten any better? I mean, you got royalties and other things.
It's gotten worse. To give you an example, in the 1990s, my inking page rate at that time was $140 a page. And depending on the pencil artist, I could ink maybe 2 pages a day. So that was a decent income back then.
Yeah.
Fast forward 20 years later, my top inking rate was $100 a page.
Wow. Whoa.
Wow.
That's taking a hit.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a pay cut, man. That's
well, I mean, not even counting cost of living. 20 years later.
Exactly.
And the problem was that there's so many art schools, comic artist schools, that are churning out graduating classes every year, plus all the foreign talent of Europe and South America available, that the companies took advantage of that, and they just incrementally started lowering rates to the point to where I couldn't make a living anymore.
Again, it's kind of like baseball. The Dodgers started it. I think they imported a lot of foreign, now maybe
but their rates went up.
Their rates went up, right? Opposite, but
ours
they
went
were
down.
They were
because
pulling
of
from a more global.
Yeah, the availability of artists now is greater than it's ever been, and the companies
Yeah.
take advantage of that and lower the rates, because the cost of living in another country is probably lower than here in the United States, and so why pay me 140 when you could pay, someone in Argentina 90? So most of the older experienced artists kind of were phased out of the industry. That's why you don't see guys my age in comics anymore. And we're all doing crowdfunding and that kind of thing.
Yeah. What do you think about this new crowdfunding thing?
Well, I dipped my toe in that pool with my book. It's a collection of like these Star Wars pieces and other pieces that I've done. It's a black and white art book, kind of like a coffee table art book. And my hope is, if this succeeds, this crowdfunding project succeeds, then I will do a crowdfunding for a graphic novel.
Yes. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All the momentum is sort of on the independent crowdfunding type scene right now of what's happening in what you call traditional Western sequential artwork. Is there any particular genre you prefer, Gary?
No, for me, it's all about characters and story, and then the genre, fits in with that. I don't try to do a genre. I just, if I have a story that I want to tell, that's what compels me. One thing that
impressed me, Gary, was it seemed like that the comics kind of grew with me. That's why I kind of stuck with it most of my life, because then the direct scene did come in, and you got things like Watchmen, Dark Knight, and Longbow Hunter, and so many great, prestige format books that had never happened in comics before. It seemed like the stories were getting more complex, and like the hobby was growing with me. Somewhere it disintegrated in the atmosphere for me in the 90s.
Well, I think
I still kept with it,
Yeah, a lot of that is due to editorial at the companies. Is that when I broke into comics in the 80s, most of the editors were creators themselves. They were either artists, or in most cases, they were writers. Guys like Archie Goodwin and Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, Ernie Colón, Dick Giordano, people like that were editors. And so they encouraged creativity.
Yeah.
I told you the story about the accountants of the system now, that they discourage creativity. So it's a completely different system now, that the innovation part of it is gone. And that's why you don't have, the experiences that you were talking about of different kinds of stories and changing landscapes of broadening your imagination, is because they're just rehashing what they think will make money.
I think there's a big generational shift too, Gary, that, people like Robert Kanigher and Jack Kirby and others, Stan Lee, they were either veterans or they knew veterans. They grew up they actually had life experiences, right?
Yeah.
Besides just writing for kids. It was kind of kid oriented. But as I said, in the Bronze Age with my first comics, it's like, and then we graduated in the 80s towards the direct market with more adult stories. It seemed to be growing with me. And I said, this is great. It's kind of growing with me. I think I grew up during a good time in comics, I got
I'm talking about Ernie Colón. I worked with him quite a bit at DC, and they first hired him as an artist at DC, and then they hired him as an editor, but he wasn't an editor that long. And he told me that when they first asked him to be an editor, he told them no. And they, kept after him, and he said, okay, I will do it if you give me control, that I can hire the artists that I want, I can do the stories that I want, I'm not going to be interfered with. And they promised him, okay, we'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ernie gave me a job of inking Carmine Infantino on the Flash.
Mm-hmm.
Over another inker that Ernie didn't like the inker that was inking Carmine at the time. So I inked I'm sorry. No, he muted. I inked one issue of Carmine on the Flash. And editorial told Ernie that they had to put the previous inker back on the book because the previous inker was under contract.
Mm.
And so they went against what they promised Ernie that they wouldn't do.
Right.
And that was just one example of DC's kind of, shady dealings with editors. And Ernie just ended up quitting because they broke all the promises that they gave him to hire him in the first place.
I know he didn't he work for maybe Red Circle Comics in the 70s? He was also over there at Charlton.
Yeah, Charlton. He was at Harvey.
Oh, Atlas? Didn't he do some work for?
Yeah, Ernie, I think, is one of the all-time underrated illustrators in comics. He was very versatile.
Absolutely.
And
Nino as well.
Yeah, but I don't think Alice Nino is underrated. I mean, he's a legend.
Well, yeah.
Ernie Colon, when you talk about great artists, his name rarely comes up.
Right.
The stuff that he was able to do. I mean, he did cartoony stuff, for Archie and for Harvey and that kind of thing. And then he could do superhero stuff and adventure stuff for DC. And not that many people could be that versatile and go back and forth like that. And he could paint and, color and write. And I mean, he really had it all.
Marvel's not much different, is it?
No, I mean, they're the same. I mean, they really are.
With their systems, right?
Yeah, their system, they're the same.
Yeah. It's how do you think the 80s boom affected them? I mean, I know they started doing over at Marvel Contest of Champions, and then they would do a yearly big event. You had DC with Crisis on Infinite Earth and other things like that. Some big. I love the limited series. Like we talked about Hercules, there was Punisher over at Marvel. I like the limited prestige format books that they did, or even the Camelot 3000, the maxi series that had 12 issues to it. Brian Bolland artwork, I know you've done some recreations of his work. He's just masterful, isn't he? The 80s kind of brought in a lot of those UK artists over there at the UK. They do a long time, like Dave Gibbons or Alan Davis or Brian Bolland, that I'd never heard of.
Yeah, me neither. And when I moved to New York and started working in comics, I had not seen Bolland before. Mm-hmm. And he was doing covers for Green Lantern. And the very first job, my background inking job I did, was over Joe Staton and a Green Lantern story. And Brian Bolland did the cover, and that changed my life. I mean, I wanted to be Brian Bolland after that.
Yeah. Now, if you could just go out of your body and become an inker, who would you become? Would it be Joe Staton? Your work's going to look like their work.
And they didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
It'd probably be Bolland.
I guess if you had to check it, a different style.
Yeah, it'd probably be Bolland. And there's people say they see a lot of Bolland in my work now.
Well, there's we haven't discussed it, but there's some artists that can ink their own work, and there's some artists that shouldn't ink their own work.
True.
Yeah. I always have a grievance with another artist about Gil Kane. Gil Kane is kind of like Alex Toth. He would use a pen, which was not the norm. You know, uh, you get a fat, chunky look.
Right.
You know,
It's
and
you
he's
don't get a variety of line
you don't
weight
get
with
a
all the
variety of
lines.
line weights and everything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the pens that Gil Kane used
Hmm.
were not archival. The ink would fade over time. So you look at a lot of his originals that he inked himself, the ink has faded to like brown or yellow, and it's
A brown. Hmm.
pretty much destroyed the. Oh, there's the
Yeah, I
campaign.
was going to let you complete your
Oh, there
thought, but
she
I
is.
did want to bring the campaign up.
But yeah,
Yeah,
and so him choosing to use those pens, he kind of ruined a lot of his original artwork in the long term.
hmm yeah. Recently,
Yeah,
they
because
had a
it ends up looking like dried blood after a while.
Yeah,
It kind
exactly.
of.
yeah, they had a recent auction. I think at oh, it might have been Sotheby's, it might have been Heritage Auctions, probably Heritage. Um, I just don't think that a lot of comic artists get their due, Gary. You know, overseas, it's looked at as more of an art form, but when it comes to comic artists, it's not looked at like a Picasso, like a a Pollock,
Well,
whoever. It's
yeah, that's
there's a rift there.
changing. That's changing. There's always been a snobbery in the
Mhm.
art world that the emperor's new clothes kind of thing, that whoever
Mhm.
decides what is cool, if you don't think it's cool too, then you're not cool. And comics were never in that. That's changing now, but there's still a little bit of snobbery. Like if you tell someone today, if I tell someone I'm a comic book artist, they're not impressed. But
Mm.
if I tell someone I draw graphic novels,
Yeah,
that if I say graphic novel,
right.
they're impressed. And
And
it's the same thing.
that's just semantics.
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. It's just a graphic novel has more pages. That's
I
the only
like that.
difference.
Jackson Pollock is an artist.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
that's debatable.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
again, it in like the days that we're talking about, the Romita and Kirby days,
Hmm.
they didn't consider what they were doing as art. It was
Yeah.
it was more of a production kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know,
And it was a
if you see
paycheck.
the
More
originals,
importantly and more immediately, it was a paycheck for the family.
exactly. And if you
Hmm.
if you see those originals from like the 50s and 60s, they're all torn up and tons of whiteout, and they would cut, like if
Pace.
they wanted to make a big correction, they just cut out a piece of the paper and
Hmm.
then put another, glue another piece on that hole. And then, I mean, they just treated the originals, like they knew about reproduction and what was going to look like in the book. And that's
Hmm.
what they were concerned about. They didn't think that the artwork was something of value, and they would
Right.
throw it away.
Yeah. It wasn't until around 82 that really sequential artwork was really starting to be saved. A lot of it was destroyed.
Mhm.
Yes,
Um,
a lot of it was
I
destroyed.
have some production artwork here if you want to see it.
Oh, sure.
This is from the Adler collection. This is actually a painted piece. You can see the brushwork there, very loosely done, just to indicate where everything would go. This would be the DC bullet in red, as well as here. This was probably these were done by Jack Adler. This is Bernie Wrightson piece, signed by him, and then you would have different stages, right? You'd have 5 different stages, really. You'd have the painted piece, and you'd have the approval cover, and you'd have an untrimmed approval cover with the ads printed, um, and you would have the file copy and color guide. Here's a Neil Adams piece you maybe not seen.
No,
He
I'm not.
worked on Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, I remember reading some Jerry Lewis comics by Neil Adams.
And there's one of those Jack Kirby, Joe Simon. Now I heard that Murphy Anderson was redid some of the faces of
They
Kirby.
they on the faces, a lot of the interiors and almost all the covers, they had different
Mhm.
artists redrawing and re-inking Kirby's Superman face, which
Mhm.
is kind of, a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how they wanted it to look less. I mean, more
Well,
on.
they had a house style that they
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
Superman to look like, and Kirby wasn't drawing in that house style.
yeah. Now, back in the day, though, didn't Rich Buckler and Barry Windsor Smith and Keith and we talked about the Kirby style in Defenders that Keith Giffen did. Weren't they told to draw like Kirby?
Oh
Weren't
yeah,
weren't
Kirby
weren't?
became, even Michael Golden was, when he was doing Micronauts.
Mhm.
If you
Yep.
look at like the early issues of Micronauts compared to the later ones that
Mhm.
Golden did, the art style changes. Is because they
Mm.
told him to do it like Kirby, and it didn't work. And in my opinion, the earlier issues were better when they just let Golden be Golden.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Kirby was for a while, a long while, the house style at Marvel.
Yeah. Well, now I know when Romita took over Amazing Spider-Man from Steve Ditko, there for a few issues he tried to emulate Steve Ditko. I guess they told him to do it
Well,
like
yeah,
Ditko.
but that's like
Yeah.
that's like telling a Ferrari to be a Honda. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
A Chevette.
No, okay. Romita's the Ferrari. Ditko is a McLaren.
Yugo.
I mean,
I'm sorry.
he has his attractors, but my favorite Spider-Man artist out of the hundreds that have done Spider-Man is Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, Spider-Man is kind of a creepy character because he's part spider.
Yeah.
And Ditko captured that.
I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but he's got a very tight, claustrophobic panel alignment. How he did those few issues.
Right. And Romita drew Spider-Man more romantic, more, heroic.
Well, he did a lot around that same time. He did a lot of their romance comics.
Oh yeah, before Spider-Man, he was he was
Yeah.
steeped in the romance books. So it depends. Like the Romita stuff I love because it's Romita, but for the Spider-Man character, I thought should be a little creepy, and Ditko captured that really well.
So you would not have a problem with doing a Western, doing a war, doing
no.
doing sci-fi, doing obviously sci-fi because you or even glamour shots. I noticed one of Marilyn Monroe.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I love historical stuff.
Okay.
From time to time, I work with different publishers that do war stories.
Mhm.
I currently illustrate for the American Legion magazine.
There's
There's a comic strip, a one-page comic strip in the magazine called Lore of the Legion, and it tells the history of the Legion and about their organization, and I do that. And a lot of those stories are military stories. And I also do stories for a magazine called Veteran Stories Illustrated. It's called Full Mag Veteran Stories Illustrated. And the stories are told by the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And we just illustrate from their words.
In a way,
like
doing
a
the
documentary.
in a way, doing the historical type things, hasn't it gotten easier for artists because you have the research right at the tip of your fingers on a computer now, don't you?
That part, right. Back in the day, I would have to collect photographs of reference.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go to, used bookstores and that kind of thing to find pictures of different things.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like sitting in a doctor's office or a dentist's office in the waiting room and looking at their magazines and see a picture of a battleship, in a magazine. Like, you know what? I might use this one day. And so I kind of have to slyly tear the page out of the magazine and put the picture in my pocket. And you have this file of all these photographs. Boy, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. So you're right. You can just click on the Google Battleship and you get 100 images of different angles and, all that kind of thing.
I think Rembrandt was right, Gary. We haven't talked about lighting, but lighting's very key to what you do, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And that's like in my inking book, I dedicate a chapter to lighting. Lighting determines everything. Determines the line weights. It determines the contour lines, which direction your feathering should go. And when as an inker, if I'm inking somebody's pencils, that's the first thing I try to figure out in the pencil drawing is the light source and what to do with the light source. If I want to support it, or even sometimes I have to establish a light source. The penciler may not have indicated that. I think the best illustrators in comics have strong light sources, or even 2 or 3 different light sources.
Contrast, a lot of like what Frank Miller, or maybe I've seen Jim Steranko did the same thing.
Oh yeah, Steranko, very cinematic. Kevin Nolan,
right? Sort of a noir feel, huh?
Exactly. Sean.
You think that's kind of a carryover of German expressionism?
Well, it depends on the artist and who they're influenced by. I don't know who Steranko was influenced by.
Yeah.
Because he just kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah. And he did. I wouldn't say he did a big volume of work.
No, he didn't.
He was kind of like the Steve McQueen of movies. It's like.
But he had, he was the kind of guy that juggled a lot of plates at the same time. He was into a lot of different things.
And wrote a couple books on the history of comics.
Right. And he published a magazine, Media Scene. Remember that? It was, I think, originally called Comic Scene. He did a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I love Comic Scene because it really lifted the lid off a lot of studios and got showed you the behind the scenes things.
Right. He even advertised a book on being an escape artist like Houdini. And apparently he did that for a time.
Yeah. Yeah, he's jack of all trades, isn't
he? Yeah.
and we should all have such wonderful looking hair.
I know. I ran into him one of the last shows that I went to. Ran into him at the elevator at the hotel we were staying at the convention, and dressed immaculately, perfect hair, tan, fit looking. It's like, I want to look as good as you when I'm your age. That's what I told him. And he just
Is it correct you think that comics are uniquely an American art form like jazz and a few other things?
No, I mean, comics are being done all over the world now, but comics were created in America.
Yeah.
And American comics have a certain look to them. European comics are different. They have a different style. Chinese comics are different. Asian comics, Japanese comics are different. But it was created. Comics were created in America, like jazz.
Yeah.
It's Steve Rude was sort of lamenting the demise of the comic strip in newspapers. I suppose that was all the comics that a lot of people got, except, and then before that, maybe the cheap pulp novels like The Shadow or Lee Fawkes, The Phantom, Doc Savage, and other early characters like that.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of influences, American influences that drove comics, and the market also drove it. Early days of Stan Lee, he was constantly trying to figure out what the public wanted. And that's what, drove him to create what he did, is what he thought the public would like.
I guess it's unless you kind of do it yourself, like you're doing it with crowdfunding, it's it's kind of license driven, isn't it? I know IDW was it put a lot of stock in that. It's really have hurt their bottom line. Um, you know, seemed like they were more trying for the next IP to be on TV than they were, concentrating on their comics. And I've seen that again and again. I guess I call it kind of the Ninja Turtle type thing, right? You could stop at the comic, which would be successful, but you have a popular IP like that. Well, it's kind of an outgrowth, right? To do Hasbro action figures,
Right.
cartoon, and things like that to make it even more
popular. Yeah, you're right. A lot of the comic book projects nowadays are driven by them trying to create IPs for other licensing, for film, for TV, for merchandising. I know Archie's like that. I worked with Archie for a while, Archie Comics, and they're constantly trying to figure out, projects that they can sell to different outlets.
And what is amazing is their little digest books, about this size are the only thing you can find at checkout at grocery stores and things.
They're fortunate to have that placement, that be able to sell their books. And that's how I started working for Archie. I was standing in line at a grocery store, and I saw, I think it was a Sonic Hedgehog little digest, at the checkout, and I recognized that Terry Austin had inked the cover. I recognized his inking style. And so I picked it up and looked at it, and he inked the story in the book, gave him credit. I was like, wow, Terry Austin's inking at Archie. And then I flipped through it, and I saw a couple other names that I recognized. Bob Smith, I worked with him at DC, and a couple others. And so I contacted Archie, and they hired me. And that's because I saw one of those digests at my grocery store.
Yeah. They've been around a long time. Pep Comics, with Archie, long time. And it's just a joy to get to finally meet you, Gary.
Well, I appreciate you having me on your show and talking with someone with, your knowledge of the history of comics and your background. It's there's not too many of people like you around anymore.
Well, now what titles?
Yeah, we're a dying breed, Gary.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not. What titles did you work on that I might have in my collection? Because you're, till a couple of weeks ago, it was like Gary Martin. I'm not sure.
I started. I inked for DC for quite a while. My first, I think, first full story that I was proud of was Brave and the Bold annual. I inked over Dave Gibbons.
Okay.
Yep. And then after that, I inked Blue Devil over Paris Cullens. And I inked that for a couple of years.
I think yesterday or today is his birthday, as a matter of fact.
Paris?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I haven't spoken to Paris in a long time.
I think today's his birthday.
Okay.
He first time he came to my attention, he was doing Blue Devil for DC Comics.
Yeah, and I inked Blue Devil.
Okay, well then, there we go.
I started with issue 2. Okay. Apparently, he didn't like the inker on issue 1, and he asked for a different inker.
Yeah,
and I did a sample, and Paris really liked it, and so then we teamed up from then on. And then after Blue Devil, my next regular series at DC was Doom Patrol, and I inked Doom Patrol for a while, and then a bunch of different titles, Wonder Woman, and I did a bunch of their mystery books, and what else? A lot of different things. And then from there, I worked with Image, I worked with Marvel. Inked Steve Root on Nexus and The Moth. I did some of the Marvel's adventure titles, the Marvel Adventures Hulk, Marvel Adventures Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That
was kind of like their cartoon books, wasn't it? To go along with the cartoon.
No, it was just it was actually going back to the original.
Okay.
Take on it. And then I did a bunch of stuff for Image. I worked at when Disney started a comic book line with with Mickey Mouse, and I did some Goofy. I did some Roger Rabbit, Chip and Dale. I did a bunch of those titles. I worked at that company for a couple of years. Did a bunch of stuff at Dark Horse. So I've been around. I've worked for a lot of different companies.
It sounds like it. If you had any advice for young inkers out there, or maybe some professionals like Shelby that's been around for a while, because I know they're like, "Ooh, what's his technique? What is his brushes he uses? What's his secret?"
Well, my number one advice would be get my book, The Art of Comic Book Inking. But the problem is it's been sold out for a while, quite a while. And so it's hard to get. I'm thinking about, I have the rights to it, and I'm thinking about publishing it myself at like another crowdfunding after Brush with Destiny.
Oh, that would be great.
And it's a how-to book, and it has a lot of examples and different artists in it, like Brian Boland and Dave.
I mean, wow, dude.
Yeah,
so these examples is incredible.
A lot of the great ink artists are in it. Kevin Nolan, Scott Williams. I mean, it's Danny Minky. I mean, there's just a ton of talented artists. And so this.
Wow.
This.
Which is in store? That is store, right?
Yes. Yes. And that's the Hollywood recreation. Yeah, that's the movie.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
So the whole book is black and white illustrations like this.
Oh yeah, and I'm on board, man.
Well, I mean, here's like a Wally Wood piece, and up here was a Bernie Wrightson piece. How do you just scan something off of there, or you just look at it and then recreate it? How does that come about?
Like make a copy of the original, and then put it on a light box, and trace it in pencil on my Bristol board, and then I'll take the original and put that on my drawing table, and then the inked what I'm inking on next to it, and try to emulate the inking style, like line for line. I'll ink a line and look over, and ink another line and look over. And that's how I do my recreations.
I've seen some recreated covers, and I always wondered how they did that. So you think it's pretty much light boxed?
Yes. You can ink on a light box, but that's harder for me because I don't see the lines as well as if I'm looking at a good copy. And so then my process is to trace it in pencil on the paper, and then then ink that.
I guess this is a good way to be able to ink those creators you always wanted to ink but never got a chance to ink.
True, and it's also a learning exercise. Like I've done a bunch of Wrightson recreations, and looking at all his techniques and his control and also his spontaneity and everything that he did that was amazing. Me trying to figure out how he did that stuff, even for me today.
Like maybe his Frankenstein, that's so detailed.
Yeah, and Wrightson was emulating Franklin Booth. If you're familiar with Franklin Booth as a turn of the century illustrator, Wrightson is using those techniques and on his used those techniques on his Frankenstein stuff.
Yeah, and Booth or some older creators might have looked towards artists like Durer.
Well, Franklin Booth was influenced by Gustave Doré. Like Gustave Doré was doing working on wood.
Yeah.
And Booth didn't know that. He thought it was pen and ink. And so Booth started trying to do Doré techniques with pen and ink,
Had a certain line quality to it.
Yeah, and he kind of created that
Mm.
style.
Mhm.
And you know, so as an inker, if you go back to these fathers of pen and ink, you learn these different techniques that are being used today in comic book inking.
That was wood cutting, right?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
printing. Mhm.
Yes.
I guess similar to early lithography, right? That influenced many artists at the turn of the century.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're not familiar with Gustave Doré or Frank Dubuc, you know, look those guys up. The stuff will blow your mind.
Yeah, it was a heavy influence on people like Toulouse-Lautrec and Van Gogh.
Oh,
Some of the
hey, Rex,
new print, what we call old printing techniques, was new then.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the magazines and on the posters and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see a reissue of your book, Gary, of your book.
But yeah,
on inking.
it's all hinged on, you know, this art book, if it's successful or not. And then that'll open the door for me to do the inking book, to put that out, and the graphic novel that I want to do. So I'm asking, you know, everybody in the chat, or if you get a chance to share this or even to back this campaign, I would really appreciate it.
Is this your 13 days to go?
Yeah,
Ends
it's
November
winding down.
8th.
It's winding down. Yeah.
Just shy of $5,000 right now, 72 backers. Definitely go check out the art, the ink art of Gary Martin. How big a tome is this, Gary?
It's going to be, right now, the page count is like around 115, 120, but it'll probably be larger than that. And it's going to be 8.5 by 11. So it'll be like a legitimate coffee table art book.
It's just amazing that, and I know Shadow feels the same way, that you can get such detail with a brush.
It's incredible. I can't imagine cross hatching with a brush.
Well,
It blew my mind.
Yeah, it's I think that's a challenge to. I mean, I use a brush a lot myself, Gary, because I like to challenge myself, because to me, you would maybe at this stage in your career would disagree with me that you can't get the control that you can of ease. It takes really more practice with the brush, doesn't it?
well, that's the key, is practice. And for me, I started inking with the brush, and then when I started doing more advanced techniques like cross hatching, I was just kind of lazy. I didn't want to put my brush down and, you know, find my cross hatching pen. So I just started practicing cross hatching with the brush, and I got to the point where I could do it, and that kept me, you know, the same tool in my hand, and I thought I was saving time, you know, doing that.
Right.
So it's like anything else.
Right.
Just the more time you put, more time you invest, the better you get. And it, you know, anything that's excellent is not easy. So you just have to put the work in.
Probably at this point, you're probably saying you've got more control with the brush than any other instrument.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. And I'm getting older. My control isn't what it used to be, but it's still, I still think, maybe I'll, you know, ink this part, cross hatch this part with a pen, and I'll pick up a pen and I don't like the lines. It's like, and so I have to pick the brush back up again.
It doesn't feel natural?
No, the line quality isn't as good.
Yeah.
And which is, it's odd. You know, I know it's odd, but that's, for me, I'm just more comfortable using the brush.
Well, you had mentioned about making.
Well, that's your superhero power, Gary. I mean, you are obviously a mutant, my friend.
Well, no, I don't think so, because it took me a long time to learn how to ink with the brush. It wasn't something that I just, you know, did naturally. I had to work at it.
Well, it wasn't like a dump to water type.
No, I had to work at it. And because I saw the guys that I admired ink with the brush. Dick Giordano is an example, was a brush guy. And he was a wizard with that tool. And I wanted to be that good. And so I just stuck with it.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the early Marvel magazines, Vampire Tales #5, was my first Marvel anything, and Dick Garagano did a vampire story in that. Um, and Val Merrick and other artists were in there, exposed to the very same time. And I first in the early '80s, sort of it came some of these projects kind of made superstars in a way for the very first time in my mind. People like John Byrne, Terry Austin, you started looking at the writer, Chris Claremont, and not only the artist, but the inker. The colorist never got any credit, the letterer, of course. But, for the very first time, it seemed like people were put, especially like artist and inking teams like Frank Miller or Klaus Janson on Daredevil, uh, or Dave Gibbons along with Alan Moore, as the writer. Writers sometimes like Alan Moore would come to the forefront, but I look at some of this work and I go, they just destroyed all the energy out of the stuff. Ernie Chan, you can tell is Ernie Chan over John Buscema or whoever
Right.
he inks over.
Right.
And he's a competent artist. He can draw as well as ink. Some make the crossover, some don't. From like I can do it both. I'm artist and inker. Of course, a lot of that was out of necessity, wasn't it? You get a higher page rate.
True, but that the level of artistic talent back then was so much higher than what it is today. They were true illustrators. They weren't just specialized, inker colorists. They were illustrators. They got into comics because it was a way for them to work as illustrators. And that pursuit today as an artist trying to be an illustrator is rare. That someone wants to draw comics, they don't learn illustration. They learn, they try to learn comic art, and it's a shortcut. And so they don't have that background, and plus they don't know the history of the artists that we've been talking about today. They don't respect the entire genre of comic art, and would not know what we were talking about. It's an art form in itself, and it has a history. And if you know the history, then you can explore a lot more avenues than just saying, okay, I want to be Jim Lee and produce comics as fast as I can and make as much money as I can.
That was one thing that was neat. You could see an artist evolve over years. If you kept reading the books, you could see, like Keith Giffen go from his Kirby look to his own style in Legion of Superheroes to maybe Trencher, which is way out there.
Right.
You could see his evolution, changing.
Right.
Barry Windsor Smith, same
Barry
way.
Smith. Yeah, Barry Smith. Yeah, it was very Kirby-esque.
Hey, Rex, we got Jason in the chat wanting to ask Gary a question. Do you do any digital inking at all, or is it all traditional?
That's a different art form. It's something that I hope I never have to learn. I've not done it. I'm still all traditional, and it's kind of a crusade for me. I think.
Thank you, Gary. I love that answer.
Conventional art using conventional tools is, in my opinion, it's a dying art. It's a dying craft. If you go on like Facebook inking groups, most of the artists that are on there are digital artists, and they haven't learned the craft yet. There are some excellent digital artists, but most of them are using the computer tools as a crutch, and they haven't really learned what they should. And something that is that versatile, it's easy to skip some steps and just go right in and doing it. I mean, if you remember when computer coloring first came in, it was awful. I mean, it was really bad. Just because the people that were doing the computer coloring, a lot of them were new and they didn't understand comic book coloring. They didn't understand how to augment the work that they were coloring.
I don't think they understood color theory.
Probably, yeah, you could be right. And even today, a lot of computer colorists, the colorists.
No,
I got to the point where
I see. And Rex. No, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But Rex and I have talked about this extensively. A lot of these, the new, all computer colorists and stuff. And I don't know if it's something in the program that it looks different to them, and then it comes out later. But some of these colors are so dark, everything gets so muddy.
A lot of it, yeah.
It looks like crap.
It's not crisp and clean and easily readable across the room, like something like this,
It's some of both. Is that a lot of color artists don't understand what it's going to look like in the printed form, and it usually comes out darker. And the other is that a lot of color artists are trying to make their own artistic statement. And if you're trying to make an artistic statement as a colorist, you're going to smother the black and white work underneath.
Yeah, you gotta kill the line work.
Yeah, the ones that are really good understand what the artwork is trying to represent, and they try to elevate it in the areas of the storytelling that's there, and not say, oh, look at this cool, fade technique that I'm putting here, and that kind of thing.
Well, really, it is modern day mythology storytelling, isn't it? I mean, the penciler should enhance the writer's story,
right?
The inker should enhance the penciler, right?
Correct.
And then the colorist should fill in what is not, should enhance the whole thing.
Correct. It's a team, and you can't like I say, you can't make a statement. It has to be a team effort.
Mm-hmm. And I would say one thing that's probably affected, the view of a lot of our artists and their work is simply you're on a timeline, right? You can't do your best work because we have to get it out, right?
That's why the specialization of why you don't have one guy doing everything. That's rare that somebody could do it that quickly. But that's why they created that system of penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, to be able to make that monthly deadline.
Well, your job as the inker, Gary, how do you view your job when you're inking some artist?
I understand that the pencil artist is the rock star, and I'm there to support them.
A lot of inkers don't think that way, Gary.
I know, but I'm not there to make a statement.
You're not there to overshadow, but to enhance.
Right, because one, I know that people are buying the book. They're buying it for the pencil artist if they're into the art. They're not buying it for Gary Martin. Two, if I make the pencil artist happy, if he likes what I'm doing, he's going to want to use me again. And that's how I got most of my work is the pencil artist recommending me to the editor. And so you work through the pencil artist, you team up with someone. And so you have to understand what they want and you try to give it to them. And that's why you have to be malleable. You can't, I'm going to ink it the way I'm going to ink it. You can't make a statement. You have to be flexible in your styles. And so you have to put the effort into learning different styles so you can be versatile.
I guess looking at penciler and inker team-ups, there's been some good marriages and some bad marriages, haven't there?
True. And again, that falls on the editor's shoulders of either not knowing what they're doing or which is usually the case, but a lot of it is just time concerns that they.
So I guess in
have to-
comics you would put it off on the editor to make sure that it's a good fit.
Right, because they're the ones that do the hiring and firing. That they
Mhm.
make those decisions. And nowadays most editors are not creators, they're not artists, and they really don't understand the nuances of it. They're just hiring, the people they have in their stable, or someone standing in front of them at the time. You want to do this? I got jobs like that.
Yeah.
I was standing in front of the editor and they say, hey, I have this job, you want to do it?
And it's also word of mouth, like you said. That's pretty key, right? Recommendations.
Oh yeah, and as an inker, you make friends with pencilers, and then if they like your work, that kind of thing. And that it goes down the line. The writers try to hook up with pencilers, inkers try to hook up with with pencilers. It all funnels that way.
Well, no matter who it is, whether you're a Terry Austin or a Dan Green or a Gary Martin, you're going to affect the work in some way, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean that.
Well, sure.
As the inker, yeah. I'm sorry, Shadow. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, well, sure. You look at Ernie Chan, man. He used to put his stamp on everybody's stuff when you could always tell it was Ernie.
Yeah.
He was trying to like.
Well, you're not trying to be invisible, are you, Gary?
No, you can't be invisible.
Job,
because you don't want to be invisible, but you want to enhance the art, right? Not overtake the art.
Yeah, you can't be a Xerox machine,
right?
And that's what inking is today, because they're not using brushes and quills that have life to the lines.
No, yeah,
they're using these modern pens that have these dead weights, and you don't see any variety in the line weight. They're just making the pencil lines darker, and in my opinion, that's not inking. They call it inking, but it's not inking. Dick Giordano told me that if you're just translating the pencils into darker lines, you just ask the penciler to use a harder lead, and he could dig into the paper and then just dump ink on the page and wipe off the excess, and that's all you'd have to do.
Well, that's the way Ron Wilson started. He had such a heavy leaded pencil that the inkers would just pour the ink in the grooves of the page after he was done drawing it. Heavy-handed artist when he first started.
I inked different pencilers that were like that, and part of the thing you had to do after inking the page is erase traces of the pencils. And guys that have a heavy hand, you can't erase. Yeah. So some of those pencils would show up in the comic.
Wow. Jason from Unhinged Entertainment, he says, do you think inkers have a slight advantage in growth by inking different pencilers and absorbing a variety of techniques to become their own penciler?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what happened with me. I learned a lot about drawing just by inking, really good pencil artists, because you pick up stuff. Yeah. You can't help but pick up stuff. So if you're only inking your own work, you're not going to grow that much as an artist. If you're inking artists that are better than you, it's just like anything else, like playing tennis, playing poker, whatever it is.
You're going to get better.
Against somebody that's better than you, you're going to get better.
Well, you as an inker, you need to know anatomy, right? You need to know lighting. Absolutely. You need to be, especially on some of those artists that don't fill in the gaps for you, that give you incomplete work.
Right. And
hey, Rex, do you still have, sorry, Gary.
No, go ahead.
Do you still have that piece you showed yesterday of Bernie Wrightson with Judge Jusko ink over the top of it?
I can find it while he answers the question.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm interested in seeing that. So what was the original question?
Oh, that was my original question. I'm sorry. I think we got to go back to the chat here.
I was going to say, when you're inking different pencilers, some pencilers their lines tend to be vague. Everything isn't there. You have to. There's a lot of interpretation involved in inking pencils. It's not like you see a line and you ink that line. It's a lot of times you're kind of guessing if the line you're seeing is the line you should ink, because it could be sketchy. It could be like Carmine Infantino. He was his pencils. You get a chance to see his pencils; they're very sketchy. He would put 3 or 4 lines down for like to show the shape of a shoulder. It'd be like 4 or 5 lines. And so as an inker, you have to decide which line to ink, and then you erase the rest. He was also very heavy-handed, so erasing his pencils was difficult, because you'd be erasing your own ink. You'd be erasing so hard, you'd be erasing your inks, and then you'd have to ink over, Anyway.
Oh, God.
So
you probably prefer everything there, don't you?
Well, it makes the job easier, but you can't always get pencilers like that. That some pencilers are vague. I keep
Right.
using Gene Colan as an example. That if you see his pencils, they're very soft and subtle. And like Steve Root is like that sometimes. You look at his pencils, they seem complete, but if you have to choose which line to ink and what line weight to use, you're not a Xerox machine. You have to make a choice. And that's
why the inker,
your knowledge of anatomy and all that comes
in a way, you're the final editor. It seems
Correct.
like you can either kill the energy out of a piece of art, or you can infuse it with even more energy.
Exactly,
right?
Because the line that the inker puts down is the line that's printed, not the penciler line. It's the inker line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gene Colan had a style that was just like no one else's.
No, if you see his pencils, he's one guy that I didn't get a chance to ink, and I'm
really?
Frankly, I'm glad I didn't.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because his lines were so subtle and tonal. I mean, he laid down grays, and the guys that were really good at inking him, like we mentioned, Tom Palmer, Steve Leoleja, who inked his Howard the Duck stuff. Those guys, Klaus Janson, those guys knew how to interpret Colan's grays and blacks and determine, the techniques that they use in ink line to create grays and blacks. Klaus used lots of Zipatone and that kind of thing. So did Tom Palmer. So that that's what I meant by saying, I don't think Joe Sinnott was a good choice on Gene Colan, because Joe Sinnott was bolder and he didn't really use gray tones that much. So someone like, that draws in a Gene Colan style where you have to do a lot of interpreting, you're in trouble if you don't have a solid foundation of drawing and an anatomy, to draw upon.
What's your favorite character? Period.
I really don't have a favorite character. I read a lot of comics as a kid. I have some favorites, and when I got to work on books with those characters, it was fun, but I was never character driven. I always followed artists. When I bought comics, it wasn't because of the title or the character. It was always, who are the artists on the books. And
now, did you consciously do that? Because it seems like I unconsciously did that.
No, absolutely. I mean, even I would open it up and read the credits, or I'd be able to recognize the art by the style. And how I organized my art collection, I would label, sections of my comic boxes by artist. So if it's like John Byrne, I would have a big John Byrne section that made up of X-Men and, all the other stuff that he did. It wasn't just X-Men. It was all, John Byrne comics. And I also had like a Terry Austin section, and his was, he worked for a lot of different companies and a lot of different titles. So for me, it was always about the art, not about the characters. But it was, I have to admit, like when I worked for Disney, I inked Mickey Mouse comics. That was a lot of fun. I inked Spider-Man. That was fun. I inked, Batman stories. That was fun. So it's, it's fun to do the iconic characters, but it was never for me about the characters.
Yeah. It's not at this point so much about a portfolio, is it?
No.
Yeah. Is there anything you've not worked on? Because I would I mean, you probably done Rocketeer, right? Love that character.
Well, that would be post Dave Stevens. I don't know if I've done Rocketeer recreations, Dave Stevens recreations.
Have you? Okay.
I don't know if I'd want to do a Rocketeer comic,
right?
Because what Dave did was so amazing. It would, nobody's ever going to come close to what he did. And it's like, remaking a great film. Sometimes when they remake a film that was a classic, you just shake your head and say, why are they doing that?
How much of it is in your head? Because with an artist, if it's, the trick is to learn to get from here down on the page, right?
Right.
From what you see is faithful. The way you see the world, it seems.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what you're trying to do?
It depends. If I'm doing comics, it's and just drawing, that's what it is. I'm trying to mimic the image I have in my head. If I'm doing a portrait, you have to rely heavily on reference, either like somebody sitting for you or photographs, because you want to capture their likeness. That's a death sentence if you do a portrait for someone as a commission and they don't like it because they don't think it looks like them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's, but I do a lot of portraits as commissions, and that's something I've learned to rely heavily on as photographic reference.
Yeah.
And there used to be a stigma with using photographs and drawing, but a photograph is a tool like anything else.
Right.
And
I know Alex Ross does a lot of.
He's tons of photographs. Yeah.
Yeah.
What freed me up as an artist is when I read a Wally Wood interview, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but I think it goes something like, "Why draw it when you can steal it?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if Wally Wood has that attitude.
Yeah. Well, there are shortcuts, right? I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you sit down to a blank piece of paper, right?
Well, if you're working on a monthly book, if you've got a schedule to keep you, it's all about shortcuts.
Yeah.
And
creativity, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly. Because the deadline, if it's being published, that's a hard deadline, and there's nothing, you can't do anything to get around that.
How important is a good editor, bad editor?
Oh, it makes or breaks the book.
Yeah,
it really does.
Mm-hmm.
The best editors I had were creators, and they understood the process, and they were wanting to work with you and make the project better. Most editors don't even look at the work. They just take it from one artist and give it to the other. Like they take my inks and give it to the colorist without really even looking at it. I got to the point to where I was putting Pogo in the backgrounds of like every job that I did.
Oh, okay.
And not a single editor ever called me out on it. Not a single one.
Is that kind of like a little signature away?
I don't know if it's a signature, but I mean, even in Blue Devil, if you look at the DC Who's Who book that has Paris Cullen's Blue Devil, the image that I inked, Blue Devil is in front of a portal, and all these demons are coming out of the portal on the piece. If you look closely, Pogo is also coming out of that.
He's one of the demons.
Yeah, Pogo is a demon. No one has ever said, "Hey, what's Pogo doing coming out of hell?" With these demons. Editor didn't see it. I mean, just they don't really anymore. They don't look at the work.
And that was back in the day,
right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
even
when
less.
I started. That's when I started doing it just to see. you know. And one time when I was working for Disney, I was working on a Mickey Mouse comic, and I put Sam and Max in the background of a Mickey Mouse story. Like they're just silhouettes, you know, like far away, waving like on a bridge in the background. And the editor called me up, and I think it was David Bogart called me up and said, "Oh, we all saw your Sam and Max. We all got a kick out of it in the office. It was good for a good laugh, but don't ever do it again and take it out." So,
Oh, wow.
like, okay. Well, you know, I appreciate
Alrighty then.
you even saw it, so I won't do it again.
Well, Gary, I appreciate you coming in here and spending a couple hours with us. I hope you'll consider coming back and talking with us on your next project or whenever. You're welcome anytime here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Oh, Rex,
you.
did you ever find that Rice and Jesco piece to show Gary before we go?
I kind of gave up on it, but yeah.
All right. Well, never mind. We'll find it for next time, Gary.
Yeah,
Okay,
we'll find it for next time. I'll make sure I pigeonhole it away so that you can see that. It was unusual.
Thanks again for having me, and anyone out there. I really appreciate it if you could back my book. I'm right at the 5,000
absolutely
mark. Yeah. I'd like to break that goal today. And again, right. You know, like if this campaign is successful, then I'll be able to do a graphic novel.
Sitting at $4,967, 72 backers. Let's see if we can give Gary a little push here. 12 days to go.
Come on, people.
What was your decision? One last question, Gary, and I, got a million of them, but what was your decision to go over to Fund My Comic?
Probably the attitude of Luke Stone. Some of the larger platforms are a little more restrictive. Luke is very hands-on. I mean, I have his home phone number, and if I have a problem, with my page, I call him up and say I have an issue, and then he'll walk me through it right there. No way I could do that on Indiegogo or some of the others. And some of the others, there's some controversies of sometimes they don't like content and they'll shadow ban and do stuff like that. Fund My Comic doesn't do anything like that. They're
You're correct, Jason. I always have one last question, which is, I guess, one question leads to another sometimes. Like, is this your first crowdfunder?
It's the first one. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I had to ask that. Okay. So, anyway, thank you, Gary, for taking the time. It's been a pleasure meeting you. I will be checking those credits on the comics a little closer next time to see if I see your name.
Okay.
And be pleasantly surprised,
Well, thanks again, you guys, for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely.
No,
have a great day.
Anytime, sir. You feel free to come on by whenever you want.
Okay.
And also, I'll be back in your book tomorrow. I get paid tomorrow, so that's the first thing I'm going to do when my paycheck comes in.
Well, you might be the one to put it over 5,000.
There you go.
That would be amazing, dude. I would love that.
And thank you, Gary, for getting back with me so quickly when I asked you if you'd consent to come on.
Oh, sure. I know you have a schedule and, you have to plan a show, and that's not easy.
Well, we do a daily show here, so we have a lot of people on, we're
kind of flexible.
Take anybody for granted, You were the show today, and this is episode 546, and I guess we've got it in the can, folks. Let's give it up for Mr. Gary Martin. You're professional all the way down the line. Worked for many publishers. It's just an honor to meet you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Take care.